Our fireside chat guest today is Leith Martin, who is the head of Equiinet. You know, there's this one group that I go to that basically is supposed to say, like, you know, what you do for a living and then what makes you cool, right? And I think what makes you cool, 30-second line would be, I get to go to work in the Mike Tyson hangover house every day. So
it's definitely a unique environment, no doubt. And the good thing about that location in Vegas in general is everyone will come see you. Doesn't matter where they are, they're always coming at least once a year. So everyone's in town.
Fantastic. So I'm going to let you give a little bit of your background so I don't mess anything up, and then we'll start just talking about your background, about how you got involved in technology. So let's start with, how did you get involved in technology? Well, first of all, say sort of the name, rank, and serial number, what Equiinet's about, and then we'll talk about it.
So Equiinet, in essence, what we've done at Equiinet is we've combined lots of technology on a single device, and we currently sell as a service. So we have a small device that we install in a gateway in a small to medium-sized business, and it does lots of things for that business. It's a full IP PBX, so it's everything you would expect with IP telephony: voicemail to email, hunt groups, ring groups, simultaneous ring. But it also does on and off-site backup. It also does 4G failover. So in the event that you lose your wired connection, you will automatically connect to a 4G connection, so that if you're a business that runs merchant services, you never lose your credit card processing. You can still do some level of web surfing or get your email or do things like that. And it also does as a full unified threat management device. So enterprise firewall, content filtering, AV. And we're the only company that's combined all of those services in a single device and selling it as a service. There's no CapEx for the box itself. We actually provide it as our modem to deliver the services that we deliver. And because of that, the CapEx to actually deploy is inexpensive, because the business doesn't have to buy all the equipment that in essence we displace because of the service we provide on the box. So that is who Equiinet is today, and the services that we're deploying in the current business market. So our customers now are in Vegas and Southern California and Phoenix. Those are the three markets that we have officially opened. But we do have a few customers scattered across the U.S. that have either moved or have second locations somewhere else in the U.S.
And your technology platform, you could sell anywhere if you just put the sales and service people there.
Correct. And then also, in essence, that's what Equiinet is in terms of the U.S. operations. But it's founded based on an acquisition of an organization in the UK called Equiinet. That was a very successful company over a 10-year, 15-year span in the UK. And they actually sold a unified threat management device that also did backup and a few other things to schools in the UK. Very successful organization. Sold tens of thousands of boxes during that period of time. And to this day, in the UK, is the unified threat management brand in the academic market.
And so essentially they sold you Equiinet for the U.S. market.
Well, and originally the deal we cut with Equiinet is we actually we actually signed a license agreement in the U.S. And we actually took the technology that they had. We started developing as a group, adding in things like IP telephony, the on and off-site backup, all the other things that we've added. And then what we did is, because of the success we had in the U.S. market, we went back and put together a deal to combine the two organizations and now have operations in the U.S. and Vegas, with our corporate headquarters being here in Vegas.
Okay. And the UK is still operating independently as the UK company?
It is. It is. And in fact, what's happened in the UK is that the business model originally was they sold a box. So they went to this local authority, sold boxes that were deployed in all of these schools through a distribution channel, distributor, value-added reseller, install. And in essence, what we've done is, well, we've changed the business model in the UK to replicate the US market, which was selling it as a service. Right. The great thing about equipment sales is that you get your money right away. The bad thing about your equipment sales, especially in a market like the UK, is once you've saturated the market, there's no one else to sell a box to. Right. And so under the recurring business model, it's considerably more, actually based on current economic conditions in the world, it's considered more appetizing for the local school as well, because they don't have the budget they once had for equipment sales.
We used to represent a company many years ago, my PR firm, called Ultimate, that sold green screen devices to TV stations. They actually invented green screen. And the CEO was very ambitious. And when they dominated the market, he was like Alexander the Great at the end, saying, "No new worlds to conquer." He said, "It would always make me mad when I would get on a plane and fly over a city and say, there's 3 TV stations, they're all clients. Look at all those buildings that I have nothing to sell to."
Right.
So he finally ended up figuring out a way to do presentation technology and sell to 100 times different market on top of that with a different company.
Sure.
But So you bring up a couple of just interesting areas that a lot of startups have to deal with. So how many people in the audience here either work at a startup or are looking to start a startup or are in some ways an entrepreneur? Most people here, I guess that's why you're at startup, right? The rest of you are lawyers.
We need them too.
Or accountants.
Or accountants, yes, that's true. When you started at Equiinet, you actually gone through a couple of acquisitions to get where you're at. And I think that one thing that I wanted to talk about, I can sort of ease into it, is, you know, we're always talking about how you come up with the idea, and a lot of times there's sort of like the people who come up with a gem of an idea, like when we had the founder of Net Zero here, and he built this giant multi-billion-dollar IPO, and now he lives in Vegas. There's another company here that he's building. But you know, most companies aren't sort of Mark Zuckerberg in the dorm room or Michael Dell. They're really things that put pieces together and form bigger entities. Mm-hmm. So give me a little path of where you started and then how you ended up like kind of moving one company into another.
Well, I think initially in terms of this particular deal, originally what we wanted to do is we basically wanted to pull out the IP, figure out if we could do what we thought we could do, mm-hmm. and then find out if there was a market for it. And at the same time not damage the existing market in the UK. And so we put together a license agreement. The ownership structure of what was in essence UBIQUITA at the time also was an ownership structure that owned Equiinet. And then after given that success, it became obvious that the UK market should probably go in the same business direction. And so it was pretty obvious in this particular case. It is interesting to me in terms of the great idea scenario that if you travel around, specifically, you know, if you're in the Silicon Valley and you ask someone, you want to tell someone about your business idea, you don't ask them to sign an NDA because they don't care. Because ideas are a dime a dozen. It's about the execution of the strategy. And everywhere else in the world, when you talk to somebody about an idea, they always want you to sign an NDA. And I think that gives us some idea of who's the most successful, obviously Silicon Valley, in terms of deploying those type of businesses. And so the original idea, I think, is a fallacy of concept. I think that what happens oftentimes is you get involved in something and you look around and think, hey, I think there's a business here. Mm-hmm. And if we wait around till we have the perfect idea, then we never start anything.
The pivot, as they say.
That's right.
You know, it's funny because like the pivot seems like it was invented as a word 5 years ago, right? And yet, you know, I think one of the most famous pivots in history is probably arguably, you know, the most successful invention in history in many ways that is, you know, powering your industry, which is the telephone. The original idea for the telephone was that they could use it to play opera. And you could have someone recording an opera on one end, and you'd hold it up and you'd hear the opera on the other end. Wow. Obviously radio sort of disaggregated, or, you know, like overtook that market, and oh, I guess I could talk to a person and have a personal conversation. And now there's more phones in the world than people.
Well, and the other thing that I think is interesting too is that I think that oftentimes what happens is we actually think about industries as being dead for whatever reason, or non-sexy, or whatever you want to call it. But I think that sometimes that's where tremendous opportunity lies, and it's either because of disruption in technology, but it also can be disruption in terms of a business model. So, for example, in terms of what we do, there's absolutely nothing unique about the individual components of what we do. There are lots of people globally that do backup services. There are lots of people that do over-the-top content, over-the-top voice services. There are lots of people that do unified threat management or whatever. But no one delivers it the way that we deliver it on a single appliance with the business model that we do. And so oftentimes when industries are mature, there's opportunity in basically maybe applying a technological change, but also applying a different business model that can dramatically change the industry. And I think that you know, we all want to start the next Facebook, but how many Facebooks actually are organized for one success? And so industries exist, and often mature industries exist, and there's a great deal of potential innovation that can take place in those industries that can really shake up the industry and allow a greater profit to be made.
JetBlue, Southwest Airlines, for example. I mean,
who would have said no way would have gone to airline business based on the way it had performed over those years? No way.
Allegiant.
Legion, yes.
Yeah, who would have thunk it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the opportunity, the danger is waiting on the single idea, whereas the opportunity might lie in revolutionizing or changing a specific industry, I think.
Now, Equiinet is how big, and it started in its roots, and like where did your involvement in it start?
So
you're classically trained, sort of like management and all that. So
well, so what happened originally was Equiinet was founded by a great group of developers in the UK almost 15 years ago. And those guys wrote a lot of the original Linux-based code that was used in routers and switches, and they sold that to 3Com. And that was actually deployed as a product in the US later. And then after they did their earn-out, they started a new company, which in essence was Equiinet. And it's interesting because when they started, they basically built a unified threat management device. And then they started deploying it in the small business market, and then found this niche in the school industry. And really went after that, and then started adding things to that. And it was interesting because what happened originally is they built the same box, but they would sell one box that did backup services, another box that did unified threat management, and another box that did, say, web hosting and their email. But in reality, it all could be done on the same box. But their business was selling a box. And so over those years, very successful organization. I have a business partner, his name is Dominic Rocket, who's based in the UK. And Dom had his eye on Equiinet for many years because he thought that in reality it was a great technology, a great team, but maybe the deployment wasn't exactly right because it should have been sold as a service. So he and I met at the Harvard Business School in a program called OPM, which stands for not other people's money, but owners, presidents, managers. But we literally were in the same living group. It's a 3-year program, and the last 3 weeks we were on campus. We were in the same living group and literally drew up the plans for UBIQUITA on a whiteboard in one of the classrooms. That graduation took place in March, I think. In May, I flew out, met with him. We started putting together a formal business plan. The next weekend, I flew my wife out, made sure that it was a place that we could actually live and she would live.
Was that before or after he bought the Tyson house?
That was after, quite a few years after, actually. Because Don bought the Tyson house probably 10 years ago.
Okay.
And this would have been about 4.
Okay.
And then we moved out, and then we basically went about acquiring the IP license for Equiinet, and then put the deal together. So that was the origin of Equiinet. Still a very successful company in its own right. It's actually, as you mentioned, it's pivoted to a service-based business. And the channels of distribution are different in the UK versus in the US because of existing relationships. But it's still a relatively similar, and it's a service business. Now, specifically how I got involved in technology, you asked that earlier, was, so my previous company was an interesting company. I had a great business partner. My undergraduate degree is mechanical engineering. I have an MBA. And University of Alabama Roll Tide. I went to work for a guy in his basement. I had offers at the time from Intel and FedEx and Anderson Consulting, which thank goodness I didn't go that route, and then Exxon. And I just didn't want to work for a big company. So I literally went to work for this guy in his basement who was actually selling construction materials to restaurants across the US. It was a very small company at the time. He was actually a Harvard MBA. And there were I was the second or third person in the company. And I was really impressed because the first time I interviewed, he literally laid the P&L on the table, laid the funnel on the table and what they had to do, and he said, listen, I need the help. And after a couple years, he sold a percentage of the business to me, and I actually took over as president. And together, we took that business, we grew that business considerably over a 10-year span. But in the late 90s, I couldn't hire engineers to do a lot of the work we needed to do in that business, and so we started a business in Bangalore, India, to do engineering services. And in order to run that company, we had to put in a lot of things that a small company traditionally wouldn't have at that time. We had terminal servers, we had a small business server, we had lots of cloud-based application servers at a time that no one had that, especially a company with less than 10 employees. And at one time, we had 3 times as many employees in India as we did in the US. And that business was growing.
Back when that was unusual.
When I first went to India, when you walk down Mahatma Gandhi Road in downtown Bangalore, little kids were scared to death of you because they had never seen a white person. Now that's dramatically different than it was at that time. And in fact, the last time I was there, which was 4 or 5 years ago, down from our office, Accenture had an office, Intel was not far, everyone was there. But we were doing some pretty innovative things for a very small company. And I got involved in the telephony stuff and the technology because we were struggling to, our international long distance bill at the time was $4 grand a month because there was no Skype, there was no MSN Messenger, and it was either email or on the phone. And So when Magic Jack first came out, you know, we bought one, and I sent one to India, and it didn't work. And so it was terrible. And so I thought, you know, there's got to be something here that we can use. And so I had a bright programmer working for us there, and said, spend some time on this, see what you can figure out. And he called me one day and said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to shut down all traffic on your network. Don't let anyone, at that time we uploaded everything via FTP. There was no emailing any large files, so everything went FTP. And so we did that. He did the same in India, and we made a call, and the call quality was perfect. And that was my first clue that the problem with voice over IP is not the public internet. The problem is actually what happens on the LAN or on the gateway within your office.
Just the local loop is the
That's right.
last mile.
And so what we did in Equiinet, Ubiquita/Equiinet, is we actually, prioritization of that voice traffic was a big deal for us. And so on a regular basis, we can deliver a higher quality call than traditional hosted VoIP. And that's, when we drew up that plan on the whiteboard, that's how I knew it would work. When Dom told me, he says, listen, we can do this, I had experience especially with VoIP, that I knew we could pull that off.
What size companies do you service now? Is it schools still, or is it mid-size organizations, small business, Fortune 50?
So in the U.S., I would say our range is somewhere between 5 and 50 employees.
Okay.
And it's not a technical limitation in terms of that decision. It's a marketing strategy.
Okay.
A small to medium-sized business typically has one individual that makes that decision. They make a decision today, they sign a contract tomorrow, you deploy sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. A Fortune 500 deal takes months to do. Right. And as a new company, you can't wait for months to do one of those big deals. Now, you might work some of those simultaneous to what you're currently working on, but you can't wait for the one big deal.
Now, on the low end of that, because I thought you might say like 50 to 500 or something, but on the low end of that, you probably get attacked by the ring centrals and folks like that, and Vonages and the one-man things. But I mean, I know there's a number of ones now that sort of are like, you know, you buy the software, hardware, and then they give you the software, or they lease it to you, $30 a month or something like that. And then the higher end, you probably have a lot of the custom guys that go after the bigger folks. So how do you compete on both ends when you're kind of in the middle?
Well, in the higher end, what we've found is that typically the gatekeeper in a larger organization is the IT guy. And if we walk in the room and put this little box on the table and say, this box will run your organization, and by the way, that room where you have all that equipment is not necessary, it's not a very good sell for him.
Right.
That's his job in that room. And you've walked in the door and thrown something on the table that's going to basically displace a significant amount of his job.
Right.
And so that's a scary proposition for them. And on the extremely low end, the ring centrals of the world, the great thing about the hosted VoIP business model is that traditionally, while it's inexpensive, it's feature rich, and it's easy to deploy, you can't hear when you talk on the phone. And so because of that one major issue, we're actually be able to position ourselves considerably differently than traditional hosted VoIP can, because we do the quality of service on the edge of the network and deliver a higher quality call. So a lot of our customers, actually, when we first say voice over IP, don't want to talk to us, because as soon as their contract's done with RingCentral, it's coming out. But because we prioritize and we are a differentiator in that regard, then we can get those contracts. And so, frankly, because of the quality of service issue, we actually get most of those customers when they come out of contract, because we are delivering it differently than RingCentral.
We have to talk after this, because I'm moving from an asterisk system and interviewing the RingCentrals and Ringios. So,
well, we have lots of experts in the field. We'll help you with that.
Excellent. And you're a couple blocks away.
That's right. That doesn't hurt.
That doesn't hurt at all. Yeah. So, let's see. So we've talked a little bit about how you got into the field. We've talked a little bit about you know, being able to sort of compete in a market when you get bigger and smaller competitors, and the importance of sort of differentiating around the edges. Let's talk a little bit about Las Vegas. I mean, obviously this is your home now, and you know, you've sort of done the rural area of Alabama, and you've done the big city Boston, where you've got like a startup in every corner. You know, how has Vegas changed since you moved here, and what do you sort of see in terms of, you know, the future for Vegas and the technology scene?
Well, it's interesting, because when I first moved here, there wasn't Vegas Tech, because that was 4 years ago, and so there was no downtown project. And in fact, when we were trying to determine where we were going to organize this company, the fact that Dom owned property here and spent a lot of time was a factor in that. But we discussed California. But the thing about Vegas at the time, which was unique for us, is that in Vegas, a technology company would have been unique. In Southern California, we would have been noise. And that was appealing to us. The other thing was a direct flight to every major city in the U.S. to Las Vegas. Everyone in the world comes here, which is a tremendous benefit. This week is Interop, 2 weeks ago was Comtel, 4 weeks ago was Channel Partners, and those were all shows that I attended because there are partners that are there, or we actually demoed or displayed on those floors, and being located here is a tremendous benefit to us. And then also corporate tax, corporate infrastructure, the asset protection programs in Vegas or in Nevada are huge. But it's changed a lot in 4 years since I've lived here. You know, I moved here at the depth of the lowest in terms of the real estate market, which is a great time to buy a house.
Absolutely.
It's not a good time to own a house locally, but it was a great time to buy a house. But because Vegas tech has emerged, it's been great for us. We've gotten press that we wouldn't get in most communities because there is such a focus on diversification here. And you know, I'm new to Vegas because I've been only here 4 years. But I have a feeling, given the impact that gaming and entertainment and mining have been on the state in general, that for the most part, there's probably been lip service given to diversification over the last year. Yep. You know, those things go away. But as bad as the last recession was, there seems to be a focus on diversification that's never happened before and probably will never happen again. And it seems to be that there's an effort that will actually achieve something dramatically in terms of changing the socioeconomic landscape of this community. And that's an exciting time to be here.
Well, and I think also, I mean, you know, as much as the downtown project has sort of brought a lot of people into town, particularly since you want to check, you move here, that helps a lot. But I think that even more fundamental was just the fact that Zappos, you know, created $1 billion company here. And we were talking a little bit before, you know, did the formal conversation here, how much of an impact that had in places like when Microsoft became the first $1 billion tech company, and then Amazon, the second $1 billion tech company. Now, of course, you think of, you know, Seattle as being a tech town. Austin was not much of a tech town before Michael Dell started assembling computers in his dorm room. Right. And so I think Zappos is our first unicorn, as they say, and you know, we're looking for the next one.
Well, and I think between Zappos and Switch, I mean, I think there's tremendous opportunity here. And if we were talking about PayPal, and there was an interview on 60 Minutes this week on with Elon Musk, and imagine the number of companies and how much value has been created because of that exit from PayPal to eBay. Tremendous companies have been organized out of that business, funded in some way, either in a venture round or started by the group that basically exited that company. And it has to start somewhere. And the thing about Vegas, which I think seems to be unique, is that there seems to be almost a nationalistic mentality when it comes to Vegas. You know, people that move here adopt it as home, and it's such a unique place. There are very few unique cities in the world. Right. You know, I mean, you know, Paris is unique, New Orleans is unique, Vegas is by no means. I mean, it's very unique, and because of that, you know, people that live here and move here and make it home love it like no other place.
Well, I also like to say that you know, one of the obstacles to getting, you know, sort of tech companies thriving here has been that, you know, we haven't yet developed UNLV into like what UT Austin is, which took many years. You know, and when they took a lot of oil money and said, let's go out and get Nobel Prize winners and, you know, build up a department, and we haven't quite done that with the mining money yet. But you know, we're working on it. But you know, I always like to say that, you know, what we do have that other cities don't have is we can tap into the great talent in, you know, from Stanford, from UCLA, when all of a sudden they look at what the cost of living is once they get that degree. And when you're 22, 23, Vegas is not the worst place in the world to spend your early 20s. And then once you're here, then, you know, you're hooked by everything else.
Right. No doubt. And I think that, you know, and there's a sense of community here that, because initially when you hear things like community, I think there's a bit of a standoff nature because you're not exactly sure what's going to come out of that. And as long as that message is continued to be repeated and there is action specifically around that, then I think that there's tremendous opportunity because there is participation, or cooperation is probably the right word, here that I don't think exists in most communities.
I would agree with that, and I think that when you get to the size of a New York or a Silicon Valley, there's just so much competition that there is a bit of a, like, okay, these are my 9 competitors I have to kill. And here it's sort of like we're all trying to just survive together and let's help one another out. And one thing that's interesting about Vegas is that I think we get a lot of talent coming from the Bay Area because of taxes and because of lifestyle reasons. And then we had one of the companies that people were thinking might be the next Zappos, which is Remoto, and they got their first round from Sequoia. Hey, get on a plane and move to Northern California. There was sort of a deflation of the sort of the collective ego of like, oh, that's what's going to happen to our big companies. They're going to be told to move to Northern California. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think that any time you have a successful funding, then that's great. And for whatever reason they might have to move, And I think what it does is it highlights the potential, the things that we have to work on. If Remoto moved specifically because they didn't have talent in the exact area that they needed, then maybe we need to develop more talent locally in that. And that's back to your comment regarding the UNLV. But anytime you have a successful funding and you have a company that's moving forward, I think that's great. It doesn't, okay, it would be great if they would stay in Vegas, or those companies would all stay in Vegas, but companies move like that all the time, for many different reasons. And so, listen, I don't think it's a negative thing, because anytime a company comes here or starts here and develops and moves on, then that's good for the community, because it at least shows that it can be done.
Well, I was going to say it's negative the way that the University of Kentucky, now in the Final Four again, they keep on saying the problem is they keep on getting all the best talent as freshmen, and they go to the NBA the next year, and they have to start over again.
Right.
Yeah, but then they get the best talent the next year too.
That's right.
So it's if we end up becoming sort of the de facto place where you go, you start your startup, you get a great sense of community, you get to develop sort of like on a bootstrap level, and then the winners, get $10 million and get to move to Silicon Valley. That's not the worst thing in the world. And then eventually, you end up, getting companies to say, I want to stay here and build it with the talent.
Well, and I think too, what I think is important is that oftentimes you can't compare yourself to other communities or organizations that just have so many years ahead of you in terms of resource, in terms of development of talent pool and things like that. But I think that Vegas, as you mentioned, if the worst case is you come here and start a company because it's relatively inexpensive, you can get a lot of local press because of the technology diversification emphasis in the community, and you can get a company funded. My gosh, not everybody's going to move. Some people are going to stay.
Well, and you're right about how long, Silicon Valley has been Silicon Valley, depending on how you want to track it, back going as far as World War I, and then it was already established by the time that, Hewlett and Packard worked out of the garage in the 40s. So, like Steve Jobs, he was an old timer by the time the 70s came around. So, I like to compare a little bit more the development of Vegas to Santa Monica, which is where I moved from and where I still spend a lot of my time. Santa Monica really was a pretty nascent community 5 years ago. LA has always had pockets. And it also was sort of a place where things would start and then would go elsewhere.
Sure.
GeoCity started there, got bought by Yahoo. Earthlink started there, merged with Mindspring, moved to Atlanta. And there were a lot of large companies. Idealab had a big set of companies out of Pasadena. And Santa Monica was sort of this place. It was a nice little beach town that people like to go to for entertainment. And then you had some other LA startups in the Hollywood area. And it really wasn't taken that seriously. During the late 90s, I remember there was I think it was the Red Herring ranked the top 10 cities, and they had like Portland, I think, ahead of LA. And now I think that you could probably say that LA, I think from the latest venture publications, it's like number 4 or number 5. And a lot of it's because of what happened in Santa Monica, Silicon Beach, as they say.
Sure.
And literally the Silicon Beach of about 3 years ago, when we got our current office on the promenade and locked it up for 9 years. Yay. Really, it was just people sort of discovering the area and saying, I'm moving in because this person's there and there's a VC down the street. And now all of a sudden, you literally can't walk 4 feet without falling over a funded startup.
Sure.
There's something like 600 or 700 startup companies in about a 3 square mile radius. And so,
And that took how many years?
That only took about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And I think the thing about Vegas is it'll take longer,
Yep.
just because there's not the funding infrastructure doesn't exist here, and that's what they've tried to do downtown, is they've tried to build some funding infrastructure to allow that to happen. But I meet people that are moving, putting offices here, because, you know, it's an empty playing field.
Well, and I think the fact also that people move here after exits means that eventually some capital will accumulate.
That's true. You move here before you exit, right? That's
before you exit, yes,
right.
Exactly, yes.
How many months in advance? You need to make sure to educate so everyone knows when to move here.
It really doesn't have. It doesn't have to be that much in advance. I mean, I knew the exit was coming, and you know, it was. It's about 6 months will do it. Yeah.
Well, and we were talking about earlier the number of people that I've met just in the last few weeks that have moved here in the last 3 years specifically for tax. I mean, even my next door my neighbor that lives behind me, I met him one day, the dog jumped over the fence and I was talking to him and he said, "Why do you move here?" So we rented a house here because I figured if I could live here for 6 months and we liked it, we were just going to move here because of tax. And he had a place in Beverly Hills and I saw him at the coffee shop the other day and I said, "So what's the story?" He says, "I sold the house in Beverly Hills, we're staying here." So that has to impact.
And what's interesting too is that you don't see the Santa Monica companies now being asked to move to the Valley when they get funded. And you know, I like to think that I was sort of maybe part of the start of that wave because I grew up, you know, my last company, Marketware, that was funded by Sequoia and Hummer Windblad. I did not have a single dollar of funding that did not come from Silicon Valley.
Wow.
And everybody had said, you know, maybe you should be up here. And I was like, no, here's why I should be down in LA. It's a media center, we're a media company. I can get the, you know, better talent that's going to stay around longer for like 70% of the price. Right. And I'll fly up whatever you need me to.
Right.
And so we made a deal where actually I flew up every other board meeting, they'd fly down every other board meeting, and it worked out, and you know, we sold the company for $35 million.
Well, and you know, there'll be success stories like that here. I think that it might, because some of the infrastructure might not exist, it might take a little longer, but as long as the message stays consistent, then I think the opportunity will be here as well, I think. And like I said before, is I have met several fund managers that have moved companies here, or at least started offices here, specifically for the reason that there is nothing here. Right. And since there's nothing here, there's tremendous opportunity because, and you know, what Switch has done, and an announcement in terms of some of the global operations they're going to deploy, and what Tony brings to the table in terms of just the press, there's tremendous opportunity for technology companies here because you're going to get written up in publications that you wouldn't even get a glance at in Southern California or in the Bay Area. It's just not going to happen. Not going to happen. And just the coattail, you know, effect of being
other than you have us as a PR firm, but anyway.
That's right. That's right. Well, if you hire your firm, then they're exactly right.
Yep. So I'll give you one or two more questions, and I'll turn it over to the audience. So if you were fresh out of Harvard Business School with your mechanical engineering degree, and you were 26, 27, and you landed in Vegas, what would you do?
What would I do? Now, that's considerably different than what I actually did.
I know. I'm subtracting a few years.
Well,
I'm taking the seller out. So.
And 4 kids.
Oh, that's true.
You know, that's the difference.
And you were single.
Yeah. So 4 kids when I moved here. So if I was 26 and single and I just got out of school, there's no doubt that I would probably move into the downtown community. What's happened there in terms of you know, rejuvenation, what's happened there in terms of all the opportunities that you have to hear speakers, to, you know, develop relationships or do work and play or any of those facilities. You're going to just meet people that you're going to start something with at some point. Now the interesting thing is that I don't know at 26, which was almost 20 years ago, that I would have thought to move to Vegas. Because when I actually moved to Vegas 4 years ago, from Birmingham, Alabama, everybody's like, "You got to be kidding me, you're moving to Las Vegas. Is there anything outside that 6-mile stretch down the middle of town?" Right. And
I still hear that, by the way. It's like, how can you stand in Vegas? Don't you get tired of the smoke and the? It's like, you don't live in a casino floor.
But I think that you know, listen, what would I do? Based on the fact that I'm just an entrepreneur at heart, I believe, because you know I turned down companies that offered signing bonuses in the mid-90s of, you know, $20K, and I didn't have anything, so that was all that went in your pocket. There was no moving fees. There was everything fit in the trunk of your car. But I went to work for a guy in his basement. My dad was a Fortune 500 company guy. He never said to me, "What are you thinking? Are you an idiot?" He probably should have at some point, but he didn't. And I think that there's certain things about entrepreneurs that you can teach, and I think there's certain things that, people just want to do it, and not necessarily on your own, but you just feel like that. I didn't want to be part of a big company. I couldn't stand the fact that on Friday I had to fill out a W-7-5, and it had no impact on the bottom line. It didn't make the company a dime, but I had to do it for something else, and that drove me crazy. And my concept of stability is that if I was the best I could be, then if I was in a small company, I could never be fired. And if I ran the company, maybe I could be fired, but, maybe I should fire myself at times, but you at least had control of your own destiny. If you work for a big company, the concept is stability. But in reality, if you're in a division that the company no longer has need for, it doesn't matter if you're the best of 50,000. You're done. And the self-dependence of an entrepreneur, I think, is huge. And so, no doubt, if I moved here when I was 26, I'd have gotten involved in something in terms of a startup, because I can't see myself waiting tables at the Strip.
So let's have some questions from the floor here. John.
Leith, can you talk about that first company that you guys built out of the basement? It had a particular function. I don't think you've talked about that, but or business model.
So it was a great company. It was at the time. So my business partner at the time, his name was Jim Turnipseed. His last name was Turnipseed, and the name of the business was Turnipseed International. And it was funny because we toyed around with changing the name at one point, and we all agreed that it would have been insane to change the name because it's easy to spell and hard to forget, and everyone remembered the name. And they couldn't believe it was his name, which was even better. But what we did was we supplied structural steel, miscellaneous steel, and lots of other components to people who build restaurants. So let me give you an example. Chipotle, the burrito shop, that company supplied the patio railing that was almost every Chipotle east of the Mississippi over a 7-year span. So you're talking 50, 60 stores a year we did the patio rail on. Well, we also did almost all the ornamental iron, structural steel in the Dave & Buster's. In Milpitas, California, we did every one of those across the U.S. from Dave & Buster's 12.
And so the franchisors could be certain that everything would be consistent in quality, and you would not say, like, what the heck is with this, like, wacky railing at this?
The brand was important. It had to be the same. No matter where you went in the world, it had to be the same. And so at one point, we had supplied product on over 1,000 chilies built in the U.S. And some years, we would do 1,000 projects across the U.S. We would supply something on over 1,000 projects. And most of my customer base didn't know that there's a pretty good chance that that set of shop drawings or that set of drawings went to Bangalore, India. They basically did all the drafting. They sent the engineering approvals back. We sent it to fab shops scattered across the Southeast, and those products were shipped all across the U.S. And in some places, we did jobs in Japan and Puerto Rico.
And again, back to your point, incremental changes on an old business model of providing railings.
And you wouldn't have believed the margin you could make in that business, because that was a mature industry that you would have never said that you were going to go into steel business when you got out of college. Nobody wanted to be in steel business. But that business grew very rapidly, and it was a very successful company. And I had a great partner. He was about 25 years older than I was. Gave me a great deal of responsibility at a young age. And we ate lunch once a week, and we talked about the things that I was doing right and the things that I was doing wrong. And I think that was a huge impact on not only being given responsibility at that age, but I really enjoyed the growth of that business. And that business was growing. It was a lot of fun. When we were traveling to India, and we had 6 people in the U.S. and 20 in India, and the way we started that company is you literally just hired a guy, rented a house, bought a computer, then you hired another guy, then you hired another guy, and you just started. And that was fun. And then that business matured. And when I say we literally supplied product on almost every casual dining restaurant built in the U.S. or knew why we didn't. And if you built more than 20, we knew who you were. And it gotten to the point where we tried to diversify in different industries. We tried to do movie theaters, hotels. But because restaurants were built so fast, they were so complex, and they would build one in 3 to 4 months. And the suppliers had to be perfect. And so we got a lot of business.
You were able to keep your margins.
That's right. That's right. And so when that business matured, and because of the construction industry as a whole, just the way the restaurant business works is you build so many homes, you build a restaurant. When you stop building homes, you don't build restaurants.
So did that business get sold?
Well, I exited, sold it back to my business partner, my share, and then moved here, and we founded Equiinet.
other questions? Yes, all the way in the back.
Those are some pretty big brands. How did you acquire those contracts?
Well, we had different relationships. So sometimes we did directly with the brand. For example, Chipotle, we supplied the patio railing directly to a purchasing agent inside that organization. And how we got that particular contract is, well, what happened with that one was that we already had a reputation in the industry. And we always said that the best salesperson we had was someone to leave one company and go to another. And because when you leave this company and you go to this one, the first thing you do is you sit in the meeting and you say, who is supplying these products for your company? And I said, well, you know, XYZ. You say, why aren't you buying it from Turnipseed? We don't know who they are. And we got in there. So initially, it was basically, we started with a small group of contractors who were based in the Southeast. And those contractors traveled all across the U.S. building Cracker Barrels and macaroni grills and Ruby Tuesdays. And it was all across the U.S. And to be honest, we did no marketing. Zero marketing. The most sophisticated marketing campaign we did every year was at Christmas time. My business partners...
We didn't do flyover marketing. You did on-the-ground infantry marketing. You had evangelists that were loyal to your brand.
Well, and what we did
That's the best kind of marketing.
That's right, because then they were our customers and walking into someone else and saying you should be doing it. But my business partner's wife's cousin owned Sister Schubert's Rolls, which was a big, it was a small company, started in South Alabama, sold it to, I think, General Mills. And they made cinnamon rolls, and we would buy cases of cinnamon rolls every year for Christmas and ship them to customers across the U.S. And I always shipped them to the secretary, because she was the gatekeeper in the organization. And if you called in to get someone on the phone, she got them on the phone. So
oh, you're the roll people.
You shipped them to her, put her name on it, then she got to hand them out. And so that means you had the credibility with her, which that was who you wanted it with ultimately. So that was our primary form of marketing, other than the fact that customers moved and went to other companies. So it was started small, it grew rapidly because we did a good job. We did a good job. And there was no one else at the time in the U.S. that was doing it on a nationwide scale in the way that we were, because no one believed that you could ship structural steel for a small project from Alabama to California and that would be cost effective. But we did. We did.
Your channel marketing for Equiinet or Ubiquita, how'd you identify that? I mean, you're actually going through channel marketers, and can you kind of explain that? I think it's smart and unique and insightful.
Well, what we did when we founded the company in Vegas is we actually went with a direct model and an indirect model, a channel model. And the reason we did is because what's great about channel is it gives you access to a tremendous number of customers that they already have existing relationships with normally, which is great because that means they say, customer, you should do this, the customer does it. But the bad thing about channel is there's very little feedback. And so we had a direct sales team in Vegas first and an indirect team, because those guys walk out with a piece of collateral and they put it in front of the customer, and the customer says, I don't know what that means, and they walk back in and say, we need to change this, no one knows what it means. And that allowed us to streamline that marketing collateral specifically for the channel. Now the good thing about the industry that we're in is that we provide phone service. And since we provide that one component of the service that we do, every customer in the U.S. pays on a monthly basis a bill for phone service. Now, if I walked into an existing customer and said, hey, we're going to provide you unified threat management, we're going to provide you backup and 4G failover, and said, by the way, pay me $200 a month or $100 a month, then they may not have paid for that in the past. It may have been a different business model. They may have bought a piece of hardware or something like that, so it's more complicated. The good thing about the telephone part of what we do is it's already understood in the way that the customer pays for the product. And it gave us access to a channel. So there are agents across the U.S. that sell telecommunication services. And because of that, we can, because we do phone service, we can enter that channel. But because if I'm in the carrier world or I'm an ISP, the problem with the ISP business is over the next 10 years, it's going to completely commoditize unless there's major change. And you can see that with the acquisition of NBC. Because they ultimately want to control the content, because if they don't control the content, then they're basically commoditized. Every year you're going to deliver twice the speed for half the price, and that's basically, there's going to be no difference between you and your competitor. And the same is kind of come true for hosted VoIP. So if you're RingCentral or your Vocalocity, for the most part the slide says the same thing, and you know there's not much difference. But because we do prioritization and because we do all of these other things, we are different, and we're in a channel that doesn't have anything like what we do. And so the great thing is we don't have to build a channel. But because we do unified threat management, that gives us access to an MSP channel. It also, because we do 4G failover, I have a meeting later this week with a company that provides failover services in a different model to existing customer bases, but now they can use our equipment to provide failover and sell the phone service and the backup service and everything else.
Wow.
So we have different channels we can access that we wouldn't have been able to do if it wasn't for the variety of services we provide. And some of these potential agents or channels, I mean, they have access to millions of customers
Right.
and don't have a solution in the way that we deliver it. And so it's a tremendous opportunity.
So we have time for, we have started a little bit late, but we're running a little bit late. So one last question? Yes.
Out of all your experience, what would be like the one tip you would give to a young entrepreneur?
The one tip. Well, so here's my philosophy when it comes to happiness. Okay, so oftentimes what you think is that there's one thing out there that makes you happy, and you think, you know, if I could just get there, that would make me happy. But I think what happens is a lot of times you just put your head down and just start working, and then you look around one day and you say, I like this. This is good. Because if you actually keep jumping around searching for that one thing, I think oftentimes there's too much emphasis put on that. But I think that if I had to give some advice, you got to try. The reason I didn't go to work for Intel is because I knew what my career looked like for the next 15 years. Now, it could have been an extremely profitable career, but in 15 years I knew I was going to be a G8 or whatever they call that, and that was going to be an X bump every year of salary, and if I was extremely successful, then that's what my career looked like. That drove me crazy. I would rather not know, and I would rather take this option and say, if I don't take the option, then I'll always wonder. It's better not to wonder. I don't regret not taking a job at Intel, because I know what my career looks like. I would have regretted not going to work for a guy in his basement, because I wouldn't have known what we could have done. And so the regret kept me up at night, as opposed to the paycheck on Friday. And you know, that was the difference for me. I didn't want to regret. I didn't want to regret. So if you're going to regret it, then you better do that. If the other option's safe, but you know what it looks like, for me that was worse. That was worse.
Okay. Thank you, Leith Martin.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Next month, we're looking at the last Monday of April. Don't have a venue or speaker yet, but we will email everyone.
Thank you.